I was 10 years old when my childhood ended, not in some dramatic, unforgettable moment, not with screaming or violence or some catastrophe that made the news. It ended quietly in the cramped living room of a two-bedroom apartment we had just moved into after leaving our small farm town behind. My mother placed a bottle of formula in my hand and a crying baby in my arms. Then she walked out the door with my father saying they had job interviews. I sat on the torn couch, heart pounding, hands trembling, not sure what to do. But I knew one thing from that moment on. I wasn't just the big sister, I was the mother now. They never came back that night. That was the beginning of everything. I'm 28 now. I work part-time at a community resource center in the city, and I've finally gone back to school after more than a decade of detours. People assume I took time off for normal reasons, financial issues, maybe some family emergency. I never tell them the truth that I spent most of my teenage and early adult life raising children who weren't mine. The story people think they know about girls like me is usually wrong. They think I dropped out, got pregnant too young, partied too much, or wasted my chance. What they don't realize is that my mistakes were never mine. They were handed to me disguised as family duty. Back when we still lived in the countryside, I had dreams. I was going to be a vet. I loved animals, especially the ones people overlooked, the strays, the wounded, the too small to survive. When we moved to the city, I thought maybe it was for better schools or more opportunity. That's what my parents said. But it was never about opportunity. It was about control. They signed up for housing assistance, food stamps, and childcare subsidies the week we arrived. All of it under my mother's name. She claimed she needed help while she worked at a dental clinic part-time. She filled out forms saying she was paying for babysitting, but she wasn't. She had me. 10 years old, brushing my siblings' teeth, packing their lunches, walking them to preschool, holding down the chaos with my skinny arms and aching back. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself they loved me. I told myself this is what big sisters do. I didn't know it yet, but the lie would stretch for 18 years. It would eat my youth, my identity, my chances. And when I finally tried to leave and build a life of my own, it would try to swallow me whole. But I survived. And now I'm ready to tell you everything. Not because I want pity, but because stories like mine don't get told. And they should. Because someone out there is 10 years old holding a bottle, holding a crying baby, and thinking it's her fault. It isn't. It never was. My name is Emily. I'm 28 years old now, and I live in a small apartment on the east side of the city. It's quiet, mostly clean, and for the first time in my life, it belongs to me. I pay the rent. I choose the curtains. I decide when the lights go off at night. That might not sound like much, but to someone like me, it's freedom. I didn't grow up in this city. I was born and raised in a rural town 2 hours north, the kind of place where neighbors wave from tractors and everyone knows your family history back 3 generations. We lived on a small plot of land with chickens, a vegetable garden, and a rusted swing set. My dad did odd jobs, electrical work, mostly whenever someone in town needed something fixed. My mom stayed home with us kids, though now I know that staying home often meant staying in bed or leaving me with the responsibilities while she went out. We weren't rich, but it was home. I had a school I liked. I had a best friend named Chloe. I had a sense of who I was. But that all changed when I turned 10. That year, my mom got pregnant with her third child, my second younger sibling, and they decided it was time to move. They said there weren't enough jobs in town, that they needed better access to medical care, better schools. At the time, it sounded reasonable. My parents had a way of making everything they did sound like they were just doing their best for us. So we packed up what little we had and moved into the city. That's where everything started to unravel. The apartment they found was in a rundown complex at the edge of the city. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, 6 people, my parents, me, and 3 younger siblings at the time. Eventually, it would become 7. The first week in the city, I didn't go to school. I stayed home with the babies while my parents went out to apply for jobs. My mom had enrolled us in public benefits programs before we even unpacked our boxes. She wrote down that I was in school full time, that we had a licensed babysitter watching the kids during the day. She even claimed she worked over 20 hours a week as a part-time dental assistant. In reality, I was the babysitter. I was the teacher. I was the cook, the cleaner, the nighttime comfort when a nightmare woke someone screaming. They didn't say it directly, not at first. But I understood the role I was being assigned. "You're such a natural," my mother said one night as I bathed the baby in a plastic tub in the kitchen sink. Better than I ever was. I didn't know how to respond, so I smiled. I was 10. As more siblings arrived, one every 2 years like clockwork, my responsibilities grew. When I was 12, I was taking care of 3 kids under the age of 6. I got good at it too. People at the grocery store would look at me pushing a cart with a baby strapped to my chest and a toddler holding my hand and say, "You must be such a good mom." They didn't realize I was just a kid myself. The strange thing is, I didn't hate it. Not at first. I loved my siblings. I loved making them laugh, watching them learn to walk, teaching them their ABCs. What I didn't love was how invisible I became to my parents. I didn't get birthday parties anymore. I didn't get asked about my day. If I got sick, my mom told me to push through. If I cried, my dad said, "What are you so emotional about?" The only time they paid attention to me was when I made a mistake. A burned dinner, a missed diaper change, a child's scraped knee. Everything was my fault. When I hit my teenage years, the rules only got stricter. I wasn't allowed to join any after-school clubs. I wasn't allowed to have a phone until I was 17, and even then I had to share it with 2 of my siblings. My parents said they couldn't afford luxuries, but they always seemed to have money for takeout new shoes and a giant flat-screen TV that I wasn't allowed to watch. The worst part: no one outside our home really saw what was happening. From the outside, we looked like a struggling but loving family. My parents knew how to put on a good show. My mom smiled brightly at parent-teacher conferences. My dad cracked jokes at school pickups. Everyone thought I was lucky to have such a tight-knit family. But inside those 4 walls, I was suffocating. And I wouldn't realize how deep the damage went until I tried to leave. The year I turned 16, I began to understand what had really been taken from me. Up until that point, I thought I could manage. I convinced myself that once I turned 18, I would be free. I had no proof of that, of course. My parents never said I could leave. In fact, any time I mentioned college or moving out, they changed the subject or reminded me that family comes first. But I clung to that idea anyway. I worked hard in school. Despite the constant chaos at home, the sleepless nights, and the endless noise, I studied. I stayed up after the kids were in bed reading textbooks by the bathroom light. I'd sit on the floor with my back against the door, balancing equations and writing essays, while one of the twins snored beside me. When my teachers praised me for my work, it felt like water in a desert. They had no idea what I went through just to get homework turned in on time. None of them asked why I looked tired. No one noticed the dark circles under my eyes or the bruises on my arms from a toddler's tantrum. By the time I was 17, I had secretly applied to 5 colleges. My plan was simple: get a full-ride scholarship, move out, and never look back. I didn't tell anyone. Not my friends, not my teachers, not even my siblings. It wasn't that I didn't trust them, it was that I didn't trust my parents not to find out. When the acceptance letter came, I cried for the first time in years. Not because I was sad, but because for a brief, flickering moment, I saw a version of myself that wasn't drowning. The letter came on a Tuesday. I remember because it was the same day my mom announced she was pregnant again. She said it like she always did over dinner, casual, like telling us we were out of milk. "Guess what, another baby on the way." She looked directly at me as she said it. My stomach dropped. I tried to stay calm. I tried to keep eating. But then she said the words I'd learned to dread. "This one's going to need a lot of care. I'll be older this time around, and your dad's working longer hours. You're going to have to step up even more." I couldn't help it. I laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was the sound of something cracking inside me. I got into college, I said, holding up the envelope. On a full scholarship, out of state. She blinked. My dad stopped chewing. No, you didn't, my mother said. I did. There was a long pause. Then she laughed too. You're not going anywhere. Who's going to help with the baby? I looked around the room at my siblings who were all watching with wide eyes. At my father who looked more irritated than surprised. At the letter in my hand which suddenly felt like a dream I'd imagined. I'm not staying here, I said quietly. My father stood up so fast his chair scraped the floor. You ungrateful brat, he snapped. We've given you everything, and this is how you repay us. You gave me everything I asked. I've raised your kids. I've cooked your meals. I've missed school, lost sleep, given up every ounce of my life to serve this family. You're being dramatic, my mother said, reaching for the letter. I pulled it back. That night, I hid the letter inside my chemistry textbook. I emptied out an old tampon box and started stashing my grocery store paychecks inside. I had a plan now. I just had to make it to graduation. Then everything fell apart. My little brother Noah was 16 at the time, quiet, always on his phone, never said much. I thought he resented me, but one night he knocked on my door and slipped inside. I saw your acceptance letter, he said. I froze. I won't tell, he added. But I think you should leave. Seriously. I looked at him, trying to read his expression. You see it too, don't you? I asked. How messed up this all is. He nodded. I've been recording them. What they don't know. But I've been recording their conversations, the stuff they say about you, about us. I was going to delete them, but maybe you need them. That night, he handed me a flash drive. I didn't even ask what was on it. I didn't want to know yet, but I tucked it into my sock drawer like it was treasure. For a week, I walked on eggshells. I packed a go bag. I had a college dorm assignment waiting. I counted down the days to freedom. Then one night, I came home from work to find 3 government-issued cars parked outside our building. CPS, social workers, clipboards, badges. My parents standing in the doorway, tears in their eyes. They're here because of you, my mom whispered when I stepped inside. You left the kids alone. We had no choice but to call them. It was a trap. They had flipped the script. Told the state I was the neglectful one. That I had been responsible for the kids and failed. The social worker, Ms. Chen, pulled me aside. We're trying to understand what's happening here, she said carefully. Your parents claim you're the primary caregiver. Is that true? I wanted to scream. They left me with these kids since I was 10, I said. They've never paid for childcare. They used my name to apply for subsidies and kept the money. Ms. Chen didn't look shocked. Do you have any proof? I hesitated. Then I remembered the flash drive. Yes, I said. I do. I handed Miss Chen the flash drive the next morning. I had barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my parents' faces, their calm cruelty, the ease with which they lied, and the way the social workers had actually listened. I knew this was a turning point, but I also knew how slippery the truth could become when you were the only one saying it. Ms. Chen promised to review the recordings and submit them for analysis. She asked me not to engage with my parents while the investigation was underway. I agreed, but it didn't matter, because they came for me first. 2 days later, I came home from work and found all my belongings in garbage bags on the curb. My key no longer worked. There was a restraining order taped to the door, signed and filed by my own parents, stating that I was mentally unstable and had threatened harm against the family. I sat on the sidewalk in shock, arms wrapped around my bags, trying not to cry in front of the neighbors. Then I saw movement in the upstairs window. Noah. He didn't wave, he didn't smile, but he held up his phone, mouthed something I couldn't hear. I'm still recording. I spent that night in my car parked behind the grocery store where I worked. My manager found me the next morning and tried to be kind. but by the end of the week, I was let go. Apparently, customers had started complaining. They said I looked distracted, that I seemed unstable. My father's construction buddies had been coming in more often, buying single items, making comments about kids who didn't appreciate what their parents sacrificed. Small town reputations travel fast. Eventually, I found a spot in a transitional shelter. The intake worker looked at the restraining order and frowned. "Your parents filed this against you?" she asked. I nodded. "Has this ever happened before?" "Not officially." The shelter was loud, chaotic, but safe. I had a bed, a locker, and a door I could close at night. For a few days, I slept like I hadn't in years. The court hearing came quickly. My parents showed up with Uncle Marcus, our cousin, who worked in IT, and an entire folder of documents proving I was unstable. They claimed I had always been rebellious, that I manipulated my siblings, that I was violent. They had even gotten my mother's old friend, a counselor, to write a letter diagnosing me with personality disorders. I had no lawyer. Legal aid told me I didn't qualify since I wasn't the one seeking custody. My parents were trying to take official guardianship of my siblings, cutting me out entirely, even as a sister. I walked into the courtroom in the same dress I'd worn to job interviews. Wrinkled, but clean. They looked polished. My mother in a conservative blouse, my father in a suit. Uncle Marcus sat beside them, flipping through his laptop. When asked to present their case, they painted me as a bitter, delusional girl who couldn't accept reality. "She resents her responsibilities," my mother said tearfully. "She's been distant for years. Cold, unkind." I waited. I let them speak. Then Ms. Chen stood up. "Your Honor," she said, "I'd like to submit these audio recordings into evidence. We've had them analyzed by an independent forensic audio expert. They are authentic, no signs of manipulation." Uncle Marcus looked up sharply. "I object," he said. "Audio can be faked." "Are you a licensed expert in forensic sound analysis?" the judge asked. "No, but I work in IT. I know this stuff." "That's not the same thing," the judge replied coldly. Ms. Chen played the first clip. It was my mother's voice, sharp and clear. "She doesn't get to leave. She's the oldest. That's how this works. Until she has her own daughter to take over, she belongs here." Then my father. "We've got her under control. If she thinks she's walking away from this family, she's got another thing coming." The courtroom went silent. My parents exchanged nervous glances. "That's taken out of context," my mom said quickly. "Your Honor." Ms. Chen said we also have bank records, tax filings, government forms for child care subsidies, all in Mrs. Miller's handwriting, all claiming she was paying for licensed child care, which, as the court has now heard, she was not. The judge leaned forward. "Are you alleging fraud, Ms. Chen?" "Yes, Your Honor. Roughly $40,000 in misappropriated public funds over 8 years, along with evidence of long-term psychological abuse and forced child labor." My parents tried to speak at the same time. The judge raised a hand to silence them. "Do you have documentation to refute these claims?" They didn't. Their lawyer tried to delay the case, said they needed time to review the evidence, but the judge wasn't having it. Noah was called to testify. He looked small and unsure, but when asked if I'd forced him to record our parents, he said no. I started doing it because I was scared. I didn't trust them. I didn't know if anyone would believe me or Emily. They told lies so easily. "What do you want to see happen?" the judge asked him. "I want them to stop hurting people." That was the moment I knew it wasn't just about me anymore. After a brief recess, the judge delivered a preliminary ruling. The restraining order against me was lifted immediately. A full financial audit of my parents was ordered. CPS would be overseeing care of my siblings while the case unfolded. Then the judge turned to me. "Ms. Miller," she said, "we may require your cooperation during this process. Would you be willing to provide temporary support for your younger siblings?" My mind reeled. That was the last thing I'd expected. I hesitated. "I don't know. It wouldn't be permanent," she said. "Just until placement is settled." You'd be eligible for assistance, and Noah, as a minor, could be part of that support network. I looked at Noah. He gave a small nod. The judge didn't press me for a decision that day. She gave me 48 hours. After court, Chen pulled me aside and handed me a business card. This is a housing program for young women leaving abusive homes. They also help with guardianship transitions. I took it. That night I didn't sleep. The idea of raising those kids again after everything felt like reopening wounds I had barely begun to heal. But I also thought about how terrified they must be. How alone. And I thought about Noah, who had risked everything to help me escape. By morning, I still didn't have a clear answer. I kept going over the same questions. Was I strong enough to take care of them again? Would stepping into that role mean losing myself all over again? Was this just another trap dressed up as a second chance? I went to meet Ms. Chen at the Family Services office. She had already spoken to the housing program. She mentioned the apartment was ready for immediate move-in. They would cover rent for 6 months, provide a parenting mentor, and assign a family caseworker to help with appointments, therapy, and legal filings. You won't be doing this alone, she said. Then why does it still feel like it? I asked. Because your entire life, help, has meant manipulation. We're trying to redefine that now. I nodded. It wasn't a yes yet, but it wasn't a no either. I visited the apartment that afternoon. It was small, but clean. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen that didn't reek of mildew, a window that let in real sunlight. The air didn't feel heavy. I stood in the empty living room and tried to imagine it filled with laughter instead of shouting, soft voices instead of commands, freedom instead of control. Noah called that night. They're falling apart, he said. Mom won't stop crying. Dad keeps calling lawyers. The twins don't know what's going on. They keep asking when you're coming back. I'm not coming back, I said. I know. But maybe they don't need to stay there either. I didn't answer. He continued. You don't have to do it for them. Do it for us. For you. I spent that night writing down every condition I would need if I said yes. I treated it like a contract with myself. Therapy for the kids. Therapy for me. Shared responsibility with Noah. No giving up school. No giving up my job. Government support, not personal sacrifice. The next morning, I met Ms. Chen again and gave her my answer. I'll do it, but only with full support. And only because I'm choosing it, not because I'm being forced. That's what breaking the cycle looks like, she said quietly. The paperwork moved fast. The judge approved temporary guardianship within the week. My parents were charged formally with welfare fraud, child endangerment, and obstruction of justice. Their bail was denied after the court deemed them flight risks. That's when I realized they had no idea what to do without someone else to blame. The kids were released into my care on a Thursday. They arrived at the new apartment carrying garbage bags of clothes and shoeboxes full of toys. The twins clung to each other. The youngest, barely 3, stared at me with confusion. The 8-year-old stood stiffly behind the caseworker, his face guarded. Hi, I said gently. You're safe now. This is your home for a while. Where's Mom? The youngest asked. She's not here right now, I said. But you'll see her again. Later. He nodded like he didn't really understand. I took a deep breath. Do you want to help me pick which bed is yours? That broke the ice. They wandered in, cautious but curious. The apartment was small, but to them it must have felt huge compared to where we'd lived before. I had painted their room myself yellow for the twins, blue for the boys, tiny glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling. That first week was hard. They cried. They threw tantrums. They asked when they were going home. They tested every boundary, but they also laughed slowly. Trusted me again slowly. I cooked breakfast each morning, packed school lunches, helped with math homework, sat through nightly reading practice. But this time it was different, because I had help. Noah handled the morning routines while I went to school. We took turns grocery shopping, cleaning, and managing the never-ending paperwork. The kids were enrolled in therapy. So was I. Our counselor said something I'll never forget. Survival doesn't equal healing, but you've already survived. Now it's time to heal. By the third month, the kids began to stabilize. The oldest one finally started calling me Emily again, not Mama. That small shift in language meant the world to me. It meant they were beginning to see me not as the person forced to raise them, but as someone choosing to protect them. At the next court hearing, the judge asked me how we were adjusting. "We're learning," I said. "Every day is a choice, but this time it's our choice." The judge smiled. That's more than many families can say. The final twist came when my parents tried to delay sentencing again. Their attorney claimed financial hardship, family stress, mental health crises. But the evidence was overwhelming. The forensic audit showed not only fraud, but years of tax misreporting. They had claimed me as a dependent while forcing me to work full-time. They had falsified childcare payments, and when confronted, they lied. The judge sentenced them each to 2 years in prison plus restitution and probation afterward. They would be required to complete parenting education and psychological evaluations before ever regaining access to the children. They didn't look at me as they were led out of the courtroom. I didn't feel victorious, just tired. But in that tiredness, there was also clarity. They had spent years trying to silence me, erase me, control me. And now, for the first time, I had a voice they couldn't touch. It took time to feel safe again. Even after the court ruling, after the sentencing, after the locks were changed and the routines rebuilt, I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. Trauma doesn't leave all at once. It lingers, waits in corners, visits, in dreams. The kids adjusted slowly. Therapy helped. So did structure. We created a new kind of rhythm: dinners at 6, homework at the table. Saturday library trips, Sunday pancakes. Small rituals, simple things, but they grounded us. I went back to college full-time that fall. It wasn't easy. I'd wake up at 5:30 to make breakfast, help the kids get ready for school, and then rush to my first class with a to-go coffee, and last night's reading barely finished. Some nights I studied at the kitchen table while the twins colored beside me. Other nights I sat on the hallway floor outside their room typing essays on mute while they fell asleep. It wasn't the college experience I'd once dreamed of. No dorms, no football games, no late-night campus events. But it was mine. Earned, not handed. Honest, not forced. One afternoon, I got a call from the county scholarship board. I had applied months ago, almost on a whim, encouraged by one of my professors. "Emily," the voice on the other end said, "we were deeply moved by your application. You've been selected as this year's recipient of the Returning Student Resilience Grant." I had to sit down. The grant would cover my tuition for the year and provide a small stipend for childcare. Enough to hire a sitter for evenings or pay for summer camp. Enough to let me breathe. When I told the kids over dinner, the youngest clapped like we'd won the lottery. "Does this mean we can get pizza on Fridays now?" he asked. I laughed. Maybe. Even laughter took time to relearn. A few weeks later, I received an invitation to speak at a local youth advocacy summit hosted by the same social services department that had once knocked on our door. Chen was organizing it. "You don't have to say yes," she told me. "But a lot of young people in your shoes don't think there's a way out. You're living proof that there is." I didn't want to be anyone's symbol. But I also remembered what it felt like at 16, desperate, invisible, voiceless. So I said yes. The night before the summit, I stayed up late writing my speech. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I wanted to say it right. I wanted to tell the truth without shame. I wanted to talk about pain without performing it. I wanted to offer hope, not just heartbreak. At the event, I stood on a small stage microphone, shaking slightly in my hand. The crowd wasn't huge, maybe 50 people, but they listened like every word mattered. I used to think survival was the end goal, I told them. But survival is just the beginning. Healing takes longer. Rebuilding takes longer. And it's okay if you're not okay right away. What matters is that you keep choosing yourself over and over, even when it's hard, especially then. Afterward, a girl about 16 came up to me. She didn't say anything at first, just hugged me. Then she whispered, "That's my house too." I understood. I saw Grandma once more at her funeral. We hadn't spoken in years. She never forgave me, said I had humiliated the family, broken tradition, poisoned my siblings. But others had started to speak up. At the reception, I overheard cousins sharing stories of being forced into caretaking, of missed dreams of silence. The room was tense. Something generational had cracked, and no one knew what to do with the truth spilling out. My cousin Maria pulled me aside. She looked tired, worn thin by motherhood and pressure. "I used to think you were the selfish one," she said. "Now I think you were just the first one brave enough to say no." I didn't know how to respond, but maybe I didn't need to. That night, I came home to our apartment, our real home. Noah was helping the twins with spelling words. The youngest was asleep on the couch with a book on his chest. I watched them from the doorway and felt something I hadn't in years. Stillness, not emptiness, not fear, just quiet. We weren't perfect. There were still tantrums, sleepless nights, court check-ins, and long conversations about trauma. But we were okay. We were trying, and we were free. On my 29th birthday, the final guardianship paperwork arrived in the mail. Full custody of the 3 youngest siblings had been officially transferred to me and Noah as co-guardians. My parents were still in prison. They had written a few letters, mostly blaming the system, still refusing to take responsibility. I didn't answer. Forgiveness isn't something I owe, especially not to people who never asked for it with honesty. But I did forgive myself. For not running sooner. For staying too long. For believing I was the problem. For every year I spent waiting to be rescued when I could have saved myself. That's what cycles do. They convince you that love means endurance. That family means silence. That sacrifice is your purpose. But it isn't. Love is not quiet suffering. Family is not control. Sacrifice is not destiny. The oldest child doesn't have to be the shield. The mother, the fixer, the one who breaks so others can stand. Sometimes we become those things out of survival. But we don't have to stay there. We get to choose. That's the real legacy I want to leave behind, not just for my siblings, but for myself. A legacy of freedom. A legacy of boundaries and tenderness. A legacy where healing is louder than tradition. Where dreams are not denied, but redesigned. Where no child ever confuses servitude for love. That night, I tucked the kids into bed, read a story, turned off the lights, closed their doors. Then I stood alone in the hallway, breathing in the silence. And for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't waiting for anything else to fall apart. I was home.